Hello, it's Mr. Whitehead here, and I'm going to talk to you today about the 75th anniversary of VE Day, which happens this Friday, the 8th of May. So, the first thing I want to talk to you about is the concept of days that I'll always remember. And it might not be too kind of big in your mind at the minute, but if I look back at when I was in school, college, and university, so around about the early 2000s, I can kind of just think of a few standout things that happened during that time that influenced me as a person, but just more generally, society as a whole. The first thing, obviously, was the tragedy of the 2001 attacks on New York, and there you see the Twin Towers just before they fell. Then in 2002, we have the introduction of the euro across Europe, just a standard currency across many of the states, the countries in Europe. And then I do remember vividly in 2003 the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq being brought down. I remember seeing that on the news live as it happened. Then, if we have a look down here, this is 2004, so this is the Indian Ocean tsunami, which kind of claimed the lives of about 200,000 people in the end, so a massive tragedy. Then you've got the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars. The economic downturn in 2008, which saw a lot of people lose their homes and their jobs. The massive spectacle that was the Beijing Olympics in 2008, which was just something to behold. It was amazing to see. And then the rise of social media. So in the 2000s, it was really the kind of start of this social media revolution. You got things like YouTube, MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter, amongst all these other things that have kind of since disappeared. But social media was a real big thing. Obviously, it continues to be, but that was the start of it all. So, in terms of going along with this theme of days that I'll always remember, VE Day or Victory in Europe Day is a day that somebody that was possibly young at that time or a young adult at that time will remember forever. It was a very important day and a very significant, poignant day for many people in many ways. So just to put this in context, Britain had been at war since September 1939. And it caused a lot of people to endure a lot of hardships and difficulty in Britain at the time. Unlike previous wars, the Second World War directly affected more people living in Britain, so civilians. Air raids where German airplanes dropped bombs on important targets killed over 40,000 people. Okay, so these were just civilians, they weren't soldiers, they were just civilians. Also, obviously, a lot of British soldiers lost their lives. In total, 384,000 soldiers were killed and many more were wounded. So, a massive amount of British soldiers. And obviously, you can times that number by 4 or 5 to find out kind of how many families or people within those families were affected by the death of those soldiers. Yeah, another thing to think about is that soldiers for a long period of time would not have been able to visit their families, see their children, see their wives, and it was a time of great worry for them, great uncertainty, but also worry for the families of the soldiers that went off to fight. And something else that had kind of caused hardship was that food wasn't freely and readily available. The UK population was rationed, and it was to make sure that food supplies didn't run out. So people were limited to one egg per person per week. They used powdered egg as a substitute, but powdered egg, you can imagine that kind of tasted as disgusting as it sounds, to be honest. So skipping ahead, by the end of April 1945, the leader of Italy, Benito Mussolini, and the leader of Germany, Adolf Hitler, were dead, and much of Germany was in ruins. So what you can see here now is an important building in Berlin, in Germany. It was called the Reichstag. It's called the Bundestag now, and you can see it bullet mottled, and the grand dome that was situated on the top of it is completely destroyed. So 2:41 a.m. Germany surrendered on the 7th of May. And here you can see leading kind of officials in the German army signing the declaration of surrender. And the war in Europe was over. And the exciting news spread across Europe. People running out into the streets to celebrate. The bells of all the churches that remained intact were rung to spread the fantastic, amazing news that war had been kind of over. It was over. So Churchill made a big speech, and he wanted to make it clear in that speech that it was everyone's victory. Everyone in Britain deserved to be part of this victory. Everyone had to suffer many, many hardships, and yeah, it was everyone's victory, as well as the soldiers, as well as the politicians, as well as various other different people. It was the people's victory as well. So even the royal family were obviously they were very, very happy, and they could see that the country had just gone all out in terms of celebration. So London was filled with crowds of people that were just intent on just making the most of this situation, making merry, and just over the moon that them or their families were no longer in real danger or risk of being killed as a result of the war. So Princess Elizabeth, current obviously Queen Elizabeth II, and her sister Princess Margaret went out and actually kind of secretly mingled in with all the crowds, and they kind of knew at the time that this was kind of once in a lifetime opportunity for them, and they went out and they kind of secretly took part in the VE Day celebrations as well. So a lot of people might have thought that this kind of thing from Churchill was kind of trying to take some of the shine off the celebrations, but he said it for a specific reason. And Churchill said, as he addressed the people during the VE Day celebrations, we may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, but let us not forget for a moment the toil and efforts that lie ahead. So he recognised that people had put in a lot of hard work and into the war effort, and soldiers and everyone alike had expended a lot of their effort making sure that Britain and the Allies won the war. But rebuilding, getting on with lives, making sure that the UK could get back to where it once was an even bigger effort, and he wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. So, in terms of days that I'll always remember, you might not think it right now, but the current times that we're going through are days that you will remember. Obviously, they won't be for jubilant reasons, as in for VE Day, but they will be days that you'll always remember. This is the pandemic that's happening at the minute is unprecedented. It hasn't happened before in anyone's living memory, really. But we can take heart from some of Winston Churchill's words that he said in his VE Day speech. He said, "Do not despair, do not yield to violence and tyranny, march straight forward." And that was Winston Churchill trying to allay some of the fears and the worries that the British people still had about rebuilding their country after the devastation that had happened. So it's important to think about how we can keep going when we're facing difficult or worrying times like we're in at the minute. So the first thing you can do is focus on what you can change. So think about how you can help the effort at the minute to make sure that this pandemic doesn't get any worse. We try and halt its progression. So things like keeping social distancing, staying indoors where you possibly can, making sure that you've got good hand hygiene and you're washing your hands, and if you have got a little bit of a cold or anything like that, you're throwing tissues away as soon as you've used them. All those kind of things will be you doing your bit for the effort at the minute. Just stop and breathe. So sometimes it feels like all of these things are getting on top of you, especially since the TVs and the radio is all full of things like death figures and things like what's happening with the current pandemic. But just find yourself a quiet space, stop and breathe. And even though it sounds simple, those kind of things can really help you if you're feeling a little bit worried, a little bit anxious. Think about what's bothering you. Now, obviously, what's bothering me and everyone else at the minute is the pandemic. But just really, really think, what is it that's bothering you at the minute? Some people find it useful to write that kind of thing down. I know I do. So if there's things that bothering me, like I've got this work to do and that other task to do and something with the house to do and something else to do, writing it down could just make it all seem much more manageable. So just have a really good think about what's bothering you, rather than kind of thinking about in general terms, maybe specific. So is a grandparent that you're missing or a friend that you're missing? Think about what you can do to try and make that better. Maybe you could WhatsApp video message them, maybe you could Skype them. Think about how you can make it better. And then focus on something which isn't likely to make you worry. So something that you take enjoyment in. Maybe that's doing a bit of artwork, crafting, maybe that's doing a bit of reading or listening to some music that you know isn't likely to make you worry, or for some people that might be gaming. Maybe that's something that isn't likely to make you feel worry and relax you. But whatever it is, just make sure that you do that task and you concentrate on it. And that's the end of my assembly. Just want to thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you all back to Semesto, and hopefully not in the not too distant future. Thanks.